In the autumn of 1889, in a played-out silver camp called Burnt Fork in the high country of western Colorado, a woman of 28 stood at the back of a crowd that had gathered to watch a building be sold for nothing. The building was a mortuary, shuttered 11 years, its front windows soap white from the inside, and its door chained. The county wanted it off the rolls. It had been a place men crossed the street to avoid, and now it would go to whoever raised a hand, because no one wanted the thing that sat inside it, sealed and silent, since the winter the camp began to die. Her name was Della Crane, and she had $4 folded into the lining of her glove. She had come to Burnt Fork on foot over the pass with a leather satchel of tools that had belonged to a dead man, and nothing else that the world counted as worth anything. When the auctioneer called the mortuary, the men in the crowd laughed. One of them said she had bought herself a house full of ghosts. What she had bought, though none of them knew it yet, was a locked room that no key in the county could open, and the truth of 11 families who had been told a lie and made to pay for it. This is a story about a thing the world threw away. Stay with it, and you will see what patient hands can bring back into the light. Della had not meant to stop in Burnt Fork. She had meant to pass through it on her way to a sister she had not seen in 9 years, a sister in the Grand Valley who had written once, in a hand that wavered, to say there was room. The pass had closed early that year, though, with a freak September snow, and Della had come down the far side into a town that was 3/4 empty, its boardwalks sprung, its assay office boarded, its single church holding service for fewer than a dozen souls. She had taken a room above the feed store for 2 bits a night and meant to wait out the weather, intending to leave the moment the road south cleared. She had not meant to stay. The mortuary changed that. She had learned her trade from a man named Amos Penn, a locksmith and safe man who had taken her in when she was 16 and orphaned, in a railroad town in Kansas where her people had died of the fever in a single hard week. Amos had no children and a bad leg and a shop full of the most beautiful iron Della had ever seen. He had not taken her in out of charity. He had taken her in because she had stood at his window for 3 days watching his hands. And on the 4th day she had told him, plainly, what he was doing wrong with a particular wardless lock. And she had been right. He taught her everything he knew over 11 years. He taught her the lever lock and the warded lock and the pin tumbler, the difference between a lock built to keep honest men honest and a lock built to stop a determined thief, which was a different thing entirely and a rarer one. He taught her to file a key blank against the soot of a candle, so the bright marks showed where the wards bit. He taught her never to force what could be coaxed, because force broke the works and told you nothing, while patience read them like a page. He was a hard teacher and a fair one, and when she did a thing badly, he made her undo it and do it again, until it was right. And when she did a thing well, he said nothing at all, which she came to understand was his highest praise. When he died, the winter before this one, of the cough that took so many old men in cold country, he left her his tools and a single sentence she carried like a coin in the mouth. "Iron remembers the hand that made it," he had said near the end, when his own hands had gone too weak to hold a pick. "Listen for the hand, and the lock will tell you its name." She had not fully understood him then. She understood him now, with her palm flat on a dead man's door. So when Della stood in that crowd and heard the auctioneer say the mortuary had a strong room in the back that had been locked since the place closed, and that no one in 11 years had been able to get into it, and that the lock had beaten 2 professional men and a charge of black powder that had only scorched the door, something in her went still and certain. She raised her hand. She bid $4. No one bid against her. The auctioneer, a fat man with a watch chain, made his joke about ghosts and brought down his hammer, and the laughter followed her all the way to the chained front door, where she stood with the deed in her glove in her hand, flat against the cold wood, and listened to the building the way Amos had taught her to listen to iron. What the laughter did not know was that Della had heard the words strong room and known at once that a mortuary had no business with one. A strong room was for a bank, for an assay office, for a freight company that moved gold. It was not for a place that handled the dead. A man who built a heavy locked vault into the back of an undertaking parlor in a silver camp had built it to hold something he did not want found, and he had chosen the one building in town that people would not enter even when it was open. Della stood at the door a long while. Then she went to find the old man who had told the auctioneer about the powder charge. His name was Elias Hook, and he was the last gravedigger Burnt Fork had, a man near 70 who lived in a sod-roofed cabin at the edge of the burying ground, and who had dug, by his own count, more than 400 graves in the camp's short life. He was suspicious of her at first. He sat on his step with a length of pine and a worn knife, and would not look at her. And the shavings curled away from the blade and dropped between his boots while she stood at the foot of his step and waited. When she said she had bought the mortuary, he laughed the same laugh the crowd had laughed, though quieter and with less in it. "You bought Roe's house," he said. "For what?" $4, she said. He shook his head slowly and went back to his whittling. "Folks have tried that room," he said. "Tried it with iron and tried it with powder. A drummer from Denver tried it with picks for a week and went home cursing. You will not open it, and if you open it, you will wish you had not, for there is nothing in it a living soul wants." Della did not argue with him. She had not come to argue. She asked him who had built the strong room, and the whittling stopped. The man who built it was named Calvin Roe, Elias said. Roe had owned the mortuary and a good deal else in Burnt Fork's flush years. He had been the camp's undertaker and also its banker of a kind, the man who held money for people who did not trust the express company, the man who lent against claims and held the papers. When a miner died with no kin nearby, which on the frontier was often, Roe handled the body and Roe handled the estate, and Roe wrote the letters to whatever family there was far away, telling them what had been found and what was owed and what was left. People had trusted him because the dead do not lie, and a man who tends the dead seemed beyond the small greeds of the living. Then the silver had thinned and the camp had begun to empty. And one winter Calvin Roe had closed his doors, chained them, and gone east on the stage and never come back. He had left the strong room locked. He had told no one what was in it, and 11 years of weather and rumor had made it a thing the town agreed to forget. Della asked Elias one more question. She asked whether anyone in those flush years had died with money owing to them that the families never saw. The old man was quiet for a long time. Then he said there had been talk. There was always talk. He named 4 men he had buried whose people he had heard, wrote afterward asking where the money was, and were told by letter there had been none, that the dead man had owed more than he left, that the burying had eaten the rest. He had not thought much of it at the time. Men died broke on the frontier all the time. Yet there had been a number of them, more than seemed right, and they had all been Roe's accounts. That night Della sat in her room above the feed store and laid out the tools Amos had left her, one by one, on the blanket. The picks of 3 weights, the tension wrenches, the set of skeleton blanks and the small file, the brace and the bits, the 12-pound sledge she had carried over the pass and a cold chisel ground to a fine edge. She did not yet know what kind of lock waited for her behind that chain door. She knew only that a lock built to beat professional men was a good lock, and that a good lock was a made thing. and that every made thing had a hand in it, and that the hand could be heard. In the morning, she broke the chain on the front door with the chisel and the sledge, 3 blows, and went inside. The front room of the mortuary was as the dead leave a room, untouched and gray with dust, the air close and stale and faintly sweet with the old chemistry of the trade. The long preparation table still stood on its iron legs in the center of the floor, a sheet over it gone stiff and brown. The shelves along the wall still held their bottles, the fluid in them settled to a dark sludge with a crust at the rim. A coffin sat half-built on trestles in the corner, the lid not yet hung, and on the bench beside it lay a workman's plane, where some hand had set it down 11 years before, and walked out and never come back for it. There was a stillness in the room that was not the stillness of emptiness but of interruption, as though the place had been stopped in the middle of its work and held there. Della did not linger. She had no fear of the dead, and no interest in the trappings of the trade. The dead were past helping, and it was the living she had come for, though she did not yet know their names. She went through to the back, past a small office where a roll-top desk stood with its slats down and locked, the key gone, and came at last to the strong room door. It was a good door. She saw that at once, and something in her warmed to it the way a reader warms to a fine hand on a page. It was iron-faced oak, set in a frame of iron lagged into the stone of the rear wall, and the camp had built that rear wall of stone for exactly this. The hinges were inside, hidden. The lock was a single great keyhole low and to the right, and around it the door bore the long black scorch and the buckled iron, where someone had packed powder into the keyway and fired it and only welded the works tighter. 2 other men had been at it with drills. She could see their starts. 3 shallow, bright pits where bits had skated and broken. They had attacked the lock as a thing to be destroyed. None of them had listened to it. Della set down her satchel and put her bare hand flat against the iron, and it was cold with the cold of a thing that has not felt warmth in a long time. She crouched and put her eye to the keyhole, and saw nothing but dark. She took her finest pick and her lightest tension wrench, and she began, not to open the lock, but to learn it. It took her the rest of that first day only to understand what she was facing. The lock was a lever lock of great quality, the kind a careful Eastern maker would have shipped west at considerable cost, with not the 3 or 4 levers of a common lock, but 7, each cut to a different height, each needing to be lifted to its exact line before the bolt would throw. The powder charge had warped 2 of the levers and fused grit into the works. The drills had done nothing but harden her resolve. She worked by feel. The tension wrench held at a pressure as light as a held breath, lifting each lever a hair and reading it and letting it fall, building in her mind the picture of the thing she could not see. By dark, her hands ached and her eyes burned, and she had not opened it. She knew its name now, though. She knew the maker's habit in the way the levers were spaced. She had heard the hand. She slept badly and was back before light. Word had gone around the camp by then that the woman who bought the ghost house was trying to open Rose's room, and a few of the idle came to stand in the front and watch and offer their opinions through the office doorway. A lock like that wanted dynamite, one said. Another said Rose had likely taken the only key east, and there was no opening it at all, that she was wasting her life on a dead man's joke. Della did not answer them. She had learned long ago that the work answers for itself, or not at all, and that a person who argues with doubt has stopped listening to the lock. She kept her hand on the iron, and her mind in the dark behind it, and after a time the idlers grew bored of watching a woman do nothing they could see, and they drifted off, and she was alone with the door, which was how she preferred it. There is a kind of patience that the world mistakes for slowness. Stay with her a moment because this is the heart of it. What looked like a woman doing nothing was a woman doing the only thing that could be done. On the third day, she cleared the grit. She made a wash of coal oil and worked it into the keyway with a feather and a fine wire, drawing out the fused dirt a grain at a time, tapping the door now and then, and listening to the sound change as the works came clean. The powder had driven dust and scale deep into the mechanism, and the two warped levers dragged against their fellows, and she freed them as far as they would go, though they would never sit true again. It was slow, blind work, done by feel and by sound, her cheek pressed to the cold iron, and her eyes shut so that nothing of the eye distracted the hand. Elias brought her a tin of cold beans at midday, and she ate them without tasting them and did not stop. On the fourth day, she cut her first trial key. She took a skeleton blank and smoked it black over a candle until the metal wore a skin of soot, and worked it into the lock, and turned it gently against the levers until she felt them resist, and drew it out, and held it to the light to read the bright scratches where the levers had bitten through the soot. Each scratch told her how high a lever stood, and how far her blank had yet to be cut down to meet it. She filed the blank a hair, no more, and smoked it again, and tried it again. 40 times. 60. The cold of the stone room creeping up through her boots and the light failing, and her candle guttering low and her stomach long empty and forgotten. She was not aware of being tired. She was aware only of the 7 small heights she was trying to match, the 7 levers that had to rise together to their lines and hold, and the picture of them growing clearer in her hands with every cut. The way a face grows clear out of fog. Amos had told her there was no lock a patient hand could not read. She had believed him as a girl believes a teacher. Now, with the soot black to her wrists and the levers speaking to her one by one, she knew it for herself. On the 5th day, a little after noon, with the cold autumn light coming gray through the soap front windows and Elias Hook standing silent in the office doorway, where he had taken to coming each morning to sit and watch and say nothing, the key turned. She had cut it down to its last hair that morning, and she worked it in and felt the 7 levers rise under it one after another, and felt, for the first time, all 7 hold together at their lines at once, trembling there like a held cord. She did not breathe. She turned her wrench the last small degree. There was no drama in it. There was a small sound, a soft, heavy click that she felt in the bones of her wrist a moment before she heard it, and the great bolt drew back along its bed with a long, grinding slide, and the door of Calvin Rowe's strong room, locked since the camp began to die, sealed for 11 years against powder and drill, and the 2 professional men who had cursed it and gone, came open at last under her hand. Behind her, Elias Hook let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for half an hour, and said, low, that he would not have believed it had he not stood there for it. Cold air came out of it. That was the first thing, a breath of air colder than the room, air that had been sealed away from every season for over a decade, smelling of stone and iron and old paper, and something faintly of tallow. Della did not rush in. She held the door and let her eyes adjust to the dark, and Elias came up behind her with a lamp, and the lamplight went into the strong room and showed them what 11 years and $4 had bought. It was not gold. She had half wondered in the part of the mind that wonders against its own better judgment, and it was not. It was paper. The strong room was a stone box, perhaps 8 feet by 10, low and close, and its shelves, iron shelves bolted hard into the stone, were full of paper. Ledgers stood in ranks like books in a parlor, their spines stamped by year. Bundles of letters were tied with faded string and stacked in courses. Deed boxes of Japan tin, the black gone dull with the years, were ranged along the floor under the lowest shelf. The lamplight moved over all of it and found no glint of metal anywhere. Only the gray and brown of paper kept dry in the dark for 11 years, and the dust that lay over everything in a soft, even fall, undisturbed. The dust of a room no hand had touched since the door closed. And on the small table in the center of the room, where a man might sit and write by lamplight with the door shut against the world, there lay an open ledger and a pen long dried in its stand, and an inkwell gone to a black crust, and a single letter, unfinished in a careful clerk's hand, that Calvin Rowe had been writing on the day he closed the door, and never finished, and never sent. The chair was pushed back from the table at an angle, as though the man who sat in it had risen in the middle of a thought, and never sat down again. Della stood in that cold doorway, and understood that she had not found a fortune. She had found a confession. She did not read it all that day. There was too much. And her eyes were ruined from the lockwork, and some things a person knows must be done slowly, and in order, or not at all. She and Elias carried the small table and a lamp into the front room where the light was better, and over the days that followed she went through Calvin Rowe's strong room the way she had gone through his lock, a grain at a time, listening for the hand. What the paper told when she had it in order was a thing both simpler and worse than she had imagined. Calvin Rowe had not stolen gold. Gold could be missed and hunted, and a man who stole gold lived in fear of the day it was traced. Calvin Rowe had stolen estates, the small leavings of dead men, and he had stolen them with a pen, which left no glint and made no sound, and could be dressed up to look like bookkeeping. To do it, he had kept 2 sets of books. The first ledger, the one that stood openly on the shelf, the one a visitor or a county officer might be shown, was a model of careful accounting. It showed each dead miner's estate eaten down to nothing by honest costs, the coffin and the plot, and the carved marker, the doctor's last bill, the debts the man had owed at the company store and at the saloon, and to whatever card sharp had sat across from him on a Saturday. By the time Rowe's figures finished their honest-looking subtraction, each dead man had owed almost exactly what he left, or a little more, and there was nothing to send east to the widow or the mother or the orphan children but a letter of regret. The second ledger, the one Rowe had kept locked in the stone room where no one would ever see it, showed the truth. It showed what each man had actually left. It showed the dust weighed out to the grain, and the coin counted to the dollar, and the claims and shares that had real and provable value. And set beside the first ledger, page for page, it showed in Rowe's own neat, unhurried figures the exact difference between what was real and what he had written to the families. The difference he had folded into his own pocket. He had not even troubled to hide the method from himself. A careful thief keeps careful books, even of his thieving, because a careful thief trusts no one, least of all his memory. 11 families. Della counted them and counted them again. 11 men dead between 1874 and 1878, with people somewhere who had been told by a kind and careful letter that their dead had left nothing but debts, and who had grieved twice, once for the man and once for the proof that he had failed them, when the truth was that he had not failed them at all. The truth was sealed in a stone room in a town they had never seen, behind a lock no one could open, and Calvin Rowe had carried the knowledge of it east and meant for it to stay sealed until the building fell down and the paper rotted and the dead stayed poor forever. The unfinished letter was the worst of it and the best. It was addressed to a woman in Ohio, the mother of a young miner named Thomas Earl, who had died in 1878, the last of the 11. In the very winter, Rowe closed his doors. In it, Rowe had begun, as he always began, to tell her that her son had died owing more than he left. The letter stopped in the middle of a sentence. Something had stopped his hand. Della would never know what, whether conscience or fear, or only the cold coming on and the stage leaving. But he had set down the pen with the lie half written, and he had gathered his true books into the strong room, and he had locked the door on all of it and gone. He had not been able to finish the lie. He had also not been able to undo it, to write instead the true letter that would have given 11 families back their dead and emptied his own pockets and named him for what he was. He had done neither. He had simply gathered the proof of everything into the stone room and turned the key on it and walked out into the snow and the waiting stage and left the unfinished sentence lying on the table as the nearest thing to a confession a coward is able to make. The pen had rolled a little way and stopped against the inkwell. It lay there still when Della found it, exactly where his hand had let it fall. Della sat with that letter a long time. Then she began the work that the lock had only been the beginning of. She was not a lawyer, and she had no money, and she knew that a stack of a dead man's ledgers, however damning, was not the same as justice. She had something better than money, though. She had the proof itself, complete and in Roe's own hand, the false books and the true books side by side, so that anyone who could read could see the theft laid out in 2 columns. And she had the names and, in the true ledger, the towns the families had come from, written down by Roe himself, because a careful thief keeps careful records. She went first to the one family she could reach. Among the 11, one name had a Colorado town beside it, a place 2 days' ride south, where the dead miner's brother had settled. Elias Hook knew the country and had a mule, and though he grumbled that he was too old for it, he went with her, and they rode south through the first hard cold of the year to a sheep ranch in a dry valley where a man named Saul Bender was mending a fence in the wind. Saul Bender's brother had died in Burnt Fork in 1876. Saul had been written to. He had been told there was nothing. He had believed it for 13 years and had thought, in the way the wronged often think, that his brother had drunk or gambled it away and died ashamed. He brought them in out of the wind and put coffee on the stove, wary, a lean, weathered man with a sheepman's squint, and asked what business a stranger had, riding 2 days to a dry valley to see him. Della did not answer with words. She laid the 2 ledgers on his kitchen table, the false one and the true one, opened each to the page that bore his brother's name, and set her finger first on the column that was a lie, and then on the column that was the truth. She showed him in Roe's own neat figures the $840 his brother had left, the dust and the coin and the value of a half share in a claim. And she showed him the letter Roe had written, saying there had been nothing, that the burying had eaten it all. Saul Bender read it slowly, his lips moving, the way a man reads who learned his letters late. Then he put his hands flat on the table and did not speak for a long while. The coffee boiled over on the stove and neither of them moved to it. 13 years, he said at last, very quietly. I told my own children their uncle died a drunk with empty pockets. I believed it. The money is the least of it. The money is the least of what that man took from me. Della understood that. She had known from the first that the theft of the money was not the worst theft. The worst theft was the lie about the dead, and that was the thing she had really come to give back. She did not take Saul Bender's money for herself, though he offered. She told him what she meant to do, which was to find the others, all 11, and put the truth into their hands. And she asked only that when the time came he would say, before whatever court or county officer would listen, that the books were true and the wrong was real. He said he would ride to Burnt Fork himself and say it on a stack of Bibles. Then he saddled a horse and rode the 2 days back with them, because he said a thing like this should not be carried by one woman alone, and Della, who had carried everything alone for a long time, let him. The finding of the others took the better part of that winter. Della wrote letters in her own careful hand, copying out for each family the 2 columns that concerned their dead, the lie and the truth, and the amount, and a plain account of where the proof was and how it had been found. She did not flourish it. She did not accuse. She let Roe's own figures do the accusing, because she had learned from the lock that the made thing tells its own story, if you only bring it into the light. Some of the letters came back unanswered. The families moved or dead themselves in the years between. 7 of the 11 answered, and the answers, when they came, were the thing Della had labored for, though she had not known to expect them. They were not letters about money. They were letters about the dead. A widow in Missouri wrote in a slow, uneven hand that she had told her children for 11 years that their father had gone west and failed, and died with nothing, because that was what the kind letter from Colorado had told her, and that she would now sit them down and tell them the truth, that their father had not failed them at all, that he had been robbed in his grave, and that this was worth more to her than any sum of money the world could send. A sister in Illinois wrote that she had not been able to grieve her brother properly in all the years between, because the anger had stood in the way of the grief, the anger at a man who had seemed to throw his life away, and that the anger was gone now, washed out by the 2 columns Della had copied for her, and that the grief had come at last in its place, and that the grief was a mercy, and she thanked God for it. A man in Kansas, a brother, wrote only 3 lines, that he had read the figures, that he believed them, and that he would come to Colorado in the spring and stand up in any room they asked him to and say so. Della kept the letters in a tin box on the shelf where Roe's false ledger had stood, and on the hard evenings, of which there were still many, she read them over, not for pride, for she took no pride in it, but to remember why the cold and the soot and the ruined eyes had been worth the spending. Word of it spread through Burnt Fork and beyond, the way such things do, and the county at last took notice. There was no trial, because there was no one to try. Calvin Roe, they learned, had died in Cincinnati 4 years before, a respectable man with a respectable house, never having answered for any of it. His death cheated the families of the satisfaction of seeing him face it. It did not cheat them of the truth, though, and the truth, once it was in the county records, did its quiet work. The estates were reopened one by one, each its own slow business of affidavits and filings, and letters that crossed half the country and took months to answer. The true ledger, set against the false one page for page and sworn to by Saul Bender, and by 2 others who made the long journey to Burnt Fork to swear to it in person, was accepted by the county as Calvin Roe's own confession, written in his own hand, which in the end it was. A lawyer in Denver took up the recovery for a share and traced what remained of Roe's eastern estate, the respectable house and the respectable accounts. And though it was not all that Roe had stolen, for some of it was long spent, it was a good deal of it. The court ordered what could be recovered returned to the families he had robbed, divided out by the figures in his own true ledger, so that the proof of the theft became the measure of its repair. It took 2 more years to settle in full. Della saw the start of it, the first orders signed and the first draft sent, and trusted the rest to the slow, honest machinery she had set in motion, which ground on without need of her once it was started. She kept none of the money. The county, puzzled by her, asked what she wanted for herself, having bought the building and broken the lock and done all the labor of the thing. She said she wanted the mortuary's title cleared and the building made into something other than what it had been. With the small sum the county allowed her for her trouble, and with her own hands and Elias Hook's slower ones, she set about remaking the building into something a person could walk into without crossing the street first. She carried out the long preparation table and burned it behind the building, sheet and all. She took down the shelves of sludged bottles and buried their contents deep where no child would find them. And she gave the half-built coffin to the church for a man who died that winter with no one to pay for one, so that the first use of Rose's last coffin was an honest one. She scraped 11 years of soap from the windows with a putty knife and washed the glass on both sides until the autumn light came through, clean and lay in long bars across the swept floor. Then she built a bench of good pine along the bright wall and laid Amos Penn's tools out on it in their order, the picks and the wrenches and the files and the brace and bits, where anyone who came in could see them. And she opened the front room as a locksmith shop, the first the camp had had in years. The strong room she left as it was, emptied of its paper now, swept clean, its great iron door standing open against the stone. She would not lock it again. She had thought about it and decided it plainly. A room that had held a lie sealed in the dark for 11 years had earned the right to stand open to the air and the light, and she meant for it to stand that way as long as the building stood. Burnt Fork did not come roaring back to life. Played-out camps rarely do. It did not die that winter as it had been dying, however, and some of that was her. People came to her to have keys cut and locks mended, and some came only to stand in the doorway of the room that had been opened, the room everyone had agreed to forget, and to look at the daylight in it. The fat auctioneer with the watch chain came one day, sheepish, and asked her to make a key for his own front door. And Della made it for him and charged him fair, and said nothing about ghosts, because the work had already said everything that needed saying, and she had no use for the small triumph of reminding him. Della Crane never did go on to her sister in the Grand Valley, not to stay. She visited the next summer, and they made their peace, and Della came back to Burnt Fork because the shop was hers, and the work was good, and she had found in a town that had thrown away its worst secret, a place that needed exactly what her hands could do. Elias Hook lived 4 more years and dug no more graves, but spent his last season sitting on the bench in her shop in the afternoon light, and when he died, she buried him herself in the good plot, with a marker that did not lie. Years afterward, a traveler passing through Burnt Fork asked the locksmith why the heavy iron door at the back of her shop stood open with nothing behind it, and whether she did not worry about what might be taken. The locksmith, older now, her dark hair gone iron gray at the temples, set down the key she was filing and looked at the open door a moment before she answered. She said that the room had been locked once, for a long time, by a man who wanted the truth kept in the dark, and that she had opened it, and that she would not be the one to shut it again. On the bench beside her, where the gray light came in clean through the windows, she had scrubbed 11 years before, lay the smallest of the picks her old teacher had left her, worn bright by her hand, and she touched it once, the way a person touches a thing that remembers the hand that holds it, and went back to her work.